Once again, we have Brad Bradley. He's going to be presenting on errors and omissions. Take it away, Brad.
We're going to be discussing now errors and omissions. This is the second statewide program that I manage from the central office in Tallahassee. The first one's ADA, second one's E&O, and the third one is consultant evaluations. So if you have questions about any of those three topics, you can give me a call. For the learning objectives, obviously we're talking about errors and omissions. We'll talk about the procedure. The existing procedure is being replaced by a completely revamped procedure, but it hasn't been completely approved yet. So we're still operating under the older existing procedure for now, but we'll talk about that. There are two issue types. One's for the design side of the house, that's engineers of record, and then there's one on the construction side for consultant engineer inspection. So we'll address both of those topics. We'll talk about how to track the issues and how to work through recovery of damages. And then we'll look at a slide or two on best practices. So the department employs professional engineering consultants to provide engineering services in both design and construction. While the consultants are accountable for the technical accuracy and quality of their work, mistakes may be discovered during construction that result in cost and time overruns for the contractor. When this is due to acts of the consultant, EOR, or the CEI, these issues are called errors and omissions, and the department must pursue recovery of these claims from the consultant. So why do we pursue recovery? Well, quite simply, because it's the law. Florida statute requires the department to vigorously pursue these claims. The word vigorously is actually written into the statute. It's not shown on this slide, but Florida statute section 9511 refers to two statute of limitation periods for pursuing claims against the consultant. Section 9511 paragraph 3C identifies a statute of limitations of 4 years for breach of contract. And then 9511 4A identifies a statute of limitations of 2 years for professional malpractice or negligence. You could think of it that way. We will talk more about these a little later. But keep in mind that our central office, Office of General Counsel, or legal office, has indicated to us that it is their preference to pursue recovery of E&O issues under the 2-year professional malpractice or negligence statute, as opposed to the 4-year statute that covers breach of contract. In an effort to comply with these statutes, we've developed a procedure for E&O resolution. The procedure addresses the department's responsibility to identify, and we'll use the term discover. We want to discover the error and omission because that's the statutory language that's used. So instead of identify, think of discover. You want to discover the error or omission. You want to investigate it, and you want to document all of the activities as you work through this process. The procedure also covers how to assess consultant responsibility and then how to pursue recovery for damages. We've had an E&O procedure for quite some time, but it's recently undergone, as I mentioned, a major overhaul and is in the final stages of executive review. When I last looked at it, it was sitting on the assistant secretary's desk for signature or for approval, and then it has to go one more step to the secretary, and then it will be signed and implemented. Some of the major updates include, it has been updated and streamlined pretty significantly. It's been reduced from 37 pages to 18 pages. It's been reduced from 29 sections down to 9 sections. We removed a lot of the extraneous information that was not specific to the procedural instructions. Those are letters and old flow charts. We removed, as I said, non-procedural guidance. We developed a companion E&O guidelines document, and that's pretty much where all of the superfluous information that was originally in the procedure has been moved. We also clarified the discovery and notification processes. We clarified the chief engineer's role in the process. We allow now for the use of DocuSign as opposed to certified mail through the snail mail process. We eliminated some of the older forms, like the sending funds to cashier's office letters and forms. We eliminated the early notification letter, which unfortunately caused a lot of confusion with the existing procedure all along. So we figured out a way to just eliminate that from the process. And then finally, we added a closeout letter requirement. And I'll talk more about what that purpose of that is a little later. So since the procedure discusses two categories of E&O issues for consultants, let's take a quick look at the relevant definitions. The first is the engineer of record. And this is a Florida professional who's in responsible charge for preparing, signing, dating, sealing, and issuing of any engineering document for any engineering service or creative work. So that's the EOR. The consultant CEI is a consulting engineering firm holding a certificate of qualification and retained by the department to perform construction, engineering, and inspection services on a project or a series of projects. So you have the consultant EOR and you have the consultant CEI. E&O can be the result of consultant negligence, and negligence is defined here as the failure by a professional engineer to utilize due care in performing their job, essentially, or failing to have due regard for acceptable standards of engineering principles. And keep in mind that again, the central office legal office has indicated to us that it is their preference to pursue resolution of claims for E&O under the 2-year negligence statute versus the other one for breach of contract. And the final definition that comes into play here with E&O issues is the definition for premium costs. This is addressed in the CPAM, but premium costs are defined as the additional cost that would not have been incurred if the work had been included in the original contract. So this is all kind of categorized into the idea or the phrase non-value added work, which includes delays, inefficiencies, rework, or extra work. And to break the definition down further, we'll look at these three situations in which non-value added work can occur. You have work delays or inefficiencies, where the premium costs are the total for delay and inefficiency that's paid by the contractor. Then you have the premium costs that are the dollar amount of the original items of work that must be removed and the cost to remove these items. So in the picture on the screen, you can see that a newly poured sidewalk is being removed or demolished, probably because the contractor forgot to install some sort of subsurface feature like a drainage structure or something like that. Extra work is the premium cost computed as the net difference between the final agreed prices paid to the contractor and the original engineer's estimate. This is what the cost would have been had the extra work been included in the original bid at letting. The procedure essentially covers the process for following E&O issues from discovery through resolution for both EOR and CEI issues. And the construction project manager has important roles in both of these processes. And the very small illustrations or diagrams that you see, those are flow charts. The top one is for engineer of record E&Os, and the bottom one is for construction engineering inspection E&Os. We'll look at that, a blown up version right now. First, we're going to look at the EOR E&O. This flow chart replaces the outdated 5-page flow chart in the existing procedure. I know it probably looks pretty intimidating, but it's actually easy to follow, and it's broken into phases which directly correspond to the procedure, the new procedure. I'll quickly go through the phases of the process, and then we can look at each phase in more details. The phases are first discovery, followed by stage 1 assessment, and then develop and implement solution. Then you have the stage 2 assessment and the E&O notification, stage 3 assessment, then you have the director evaluation and the demand letter. Then you have the settlement phase, and litigation may have to be, you may have to go enter into litigation sometime during that settlement phase. Then you have the closeout letter, followed by the resolution itself. And this section over here on the right is showing you some of the milestone phases, if you will, as well as the documentation requirements for the RTM, where the RTM is the resolution tracking module within the Project Suite Enterprise Edition, which is the DOT's project management software. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit. So the whole process starts with discovery. Issues cannot become E&O issues until they are discovered in construction. So the discovery date is actually the date the issue is discovered. It seems simple, but at this point in time, an issue may only be a request for information or an RFI, and it's uncertain as to whether the issue is a result of a consultant E&O. So it's important that the information get passed along from the CEI to the CPM to the DPM to the EOR promptly. So just to make sure everybody understands those acronyms, CEI is Construction Engineer Inspector, to the CPM, the Construction Project Manager, to the DPM, the Design Project Manager, and then finally to the EOR, the Engineer of Record. The district EOL, or Error and Omission Liaison, must also be notified at this point. This will be repeated throughout this presentation, but timeliness matters. Timeliness matters most at discovery because at this point, the contractor may have already been delayed for a period of time, and a timely solution will help to mitigate delays and premium costs. So the earlier the EOR is involved, the earlier the contractor can resume. Timeliness also matters at this point because the statutes of limitations clock begins at discovery, specifically when the issue is discovered or should have been discovered. So looking at the first phase of the process, an issue is discovered, and there should be some sense of whether or not it's a potential E&O issue at this point. There are deadlines for the communication at this point per the procedure. The CEI should promptly notify the CPM when the issue happens. This becomes the discovery date. The CPM then has 1 day to notify the Design Project Manager, or DPM, and the DPM has another day to notify the EOR. DPM notification to the EOR contains language regarding tracking time. The notification essentially describes the issue and lets the EOR know to track their time separately so that if this is determined to be an E&O, they will not be compensated for their services in resolving the issue. The turnaround time seems fast-paced, but really if the RFI notification is by email, then forwarding the email along with the proper info should not take much time. It does not need to be sequential notification either. The CPM could also copy the EOR in their notice email to the DPM, but that same information on tracking time needs to be provided to the EOR in either case. And I wanted to mention at this point that DOT's E&O procedure is so that the DOT can be in compliance with federal regulations. So the E&O process is not just, again, just the same as the ADA. It's not just because the DOT says this is the way we want to do it. It's because we're required to do it to be in compliance with federal regulations. So I just wanted to emphasize that point. Bringing everyone together in a timely manner means that the EOR can provide a response sooner. And the sooner the issue is resolved, the less the contractor is delayed. And of course, time is money. So the smaller the delay, the smaller the overall impact to the budget. Another thing to note here is that any delay in CEI notification to the CPM may result in the CEI being held partially liable for a portion of the design issue E&O premium cost. Once everyone is on board, they work together to come up with a solution. So the department and the EOR must continue to collaborate on the project issue, and the CPM and the DPM work together to determine an appropriate course of action for the solution. So keep in mind that the primary purpose of the E&O process, especially during discovery and the initial assessment, is to get the contractor working on a solution, or rather get the contractor working on the solution to keep the construction equipment moving and to get the project built for the traveling public. The primary issue early on during this process is not to determine fault. It's to develop and implement a solution so the contractor gets moving and the delays are minimized. Now, through this process, the EOR may need to provide revised drawings, updated cost estimates, calculations, and spec changes in order to resolve the project issue. So the implementation of the proposed solution will generally result in a contract modification. It's at this point where the true cost and schedule impacts are realized. Solutions that result in a contract modification are typically handled through the execution of a supplemental agreement, a work order, or a unilateral payment. The CEI for these design error and omission issues negotiates with the contractor to determine the additional cost and time required to implement the proposed solution. For each of those modification vehicles, the SA, the work order, or the unilateral payment, the CEI must determine the premium cost associated with resolving the project issues by performing an entitlement analysis. It's also at this point where premium costs can be calculated and premium cost responsibility is decided. Coordination with the CPM and the DPM, as well as the legal office, should be done in determining premium cost responsibility. Once the responsibility is decided, the CEI enters an avoidability code into CITS or CCTS, the Construction Contract Tracking System. At this point, Project Suite Enterprise Edition, that's PSEE, also that's the FDOT's project management tracking software, pulls this new issue from the CITS system into RTM for every issue that has been entered with an avoidability code of 1 for EOR issues. So you can see there the list of avoidability codes from 0 to 5. And this training will touch on first this number 1, consultant EOR, and then we'll talk about the differences in the remaining slides. Number 3 are consultant CEI. Remember, the CEI's assessment of the responsibility to select the avoidability code is just an initial assessment. A much deeper assessment will be done by the design project manager. The DPM's assessment begins at discovery, and once the DPM is made aware of the issue, they can begin processing it. The DPM's assessment continues after contract modification and gets input from the CEI and CPM, the DDE, and legal. At this point, the design project manager will determine if the issue is the result of EOR, E&O, and send a formal notification letter to the EOR if it is. DocuSign may be used to send the letter electronically. If only a hard copy is sent, though, it must be sent using certified mail. Once the EOR responds, the DPM conducts a third assessment with all the facts in hand. The DPM will determine the E&O premium cost, which is what they feel the true consultant responsibility was, based on all the facts. This E&O premium cost is the cost claim the department will seek to recover from the consultant. If the consultant agrees with the responsibility, the issue can begin settlement at that point. If the consultant does not accept responsibility, the DPM must decide whether or not to continue pursuit, which could be a concern if the cost claim is minor. But note, however, that there is no dollar threshold for pursuing claims. If all attempts to settle have failed, the PM can conduct a benefit to cost analysis on smaller claims to justify stopping pursuit. This is the only way to justify to stop pursuit. However, the department reserves the right to table the issue and possibly group it with any other future issues that may arise. If the DPM determines pursuit should continue, the issue is escalated to the next level. Up until this point, the recovery efforts are in the hands of the DPM, but sometimes settlement cannot be reached. So the issue is escalated for final determination, first by the director, and if the cost claim is greater than $100,000, it goes to the chief engineer for final determination. A point of clarification here is that the cost claim is not the same as and may be much less than the initial premium cost identified in construction. So construction makes a preliminary estimate as to the premium cost impact. And then after it goes through the development of a solution and the 3 stages of assessment, the cost claim that the department actually pursues may end up being much less than the original estimate. The process from this point on applies to both EOR issues and CEI issues, although the offices of the PM and the director will vary. Issues go to director level only after attempts to settle have failed. The director evaluates the issue and may assemble a group of technical experts called the director group to discuss the issue. The director has final authority on cost claims less than $100,000, but the chief engineer is the one with final authority on cost claims greater than $100,000. If the director or chief decide to continue to pursue recovery, the director sends a premium cost demand letter. This letter gives the consultant a response deadline. If the consultant fails to respond or refuses to settle, the issue is sent to litigation. If the consultant agrees to settle, a settlement agreement is drawn up. This settlement phase also includes the recovery of the cost claim. The PM works with the Office of the Comptroller throughout recovery, and recovery must come from the prime consultant. Something to note here is that a recovery check must come from the prime consultant. It cannot be a check from the EOR, like a personal check. It can't be a check from the insurance company, and it cannot be a check from a subconsultant, even if the subconsultant was the responsible party. And the reason for that is that the contract with the department is made with the prime contractor. So there are other points along the way after the consultant was first notified of the issue where the decision could be made to stop pursuit, or the premium cost responsibility of the consultant could be determined to be $0. In these cases, a formal closeout letter is sent to the consultant to close the issue. If the issue was determined to have not been a consultant E&O issue, this letter will formalize that and allows the consultant to charge their time spent on the issue resolution. To resolve an issue, there either needs to be a settlement agreement with full recovery or a closeout letter. An E&O issue is only resolved and marked resolved in PSEE after all amounts due to the department are recovered with either payment or services in kind fully received. So that covers the EOR E&O process. And again, even though the flow chart might look very full and busy, if you start in the upper left corner at discovery and just follow the arrows and boxes along the path, it should, or it definitely aligns directly with the procedure, and it should make following the procedure a little bit easier. Now, a breach of a CEI contract on a construction project may result in cost and time overruns and may be determined to be a CEI E&O issue. So recovery of those costs must be pursued all the same. So now let's look at some of the differences in the CEI E&O process. They primarily occur in the first 3 phases of the process. Just a note, the procedure requires the department to pursue consultant CEI E&O issue cost recovery. However, these are few and far between. For example, I think over the last 5 years, I think we may have had as few as 9 CEI errors and omissions. I could be off, but it's a very small number. Whereas we've had probably a couple hundred of the design EOR E&Os. So the overall process looks very similar to the EOR E&O, but there are differences in these first 3 phases. The remaining phases follow the same as the EOR E&O, but the players are all on the construction side. When an issue is discovered, the district construction engineer now plays a bigger part in the process. And again, the district E&O liaison must be notified. The discovery process here is a little more straightforward and begins once the construction PM is aware of the potential CEI E&O issue. The CPM begins their first assessment of the issue and should involve the DCE, the district construction engineer, as well as the OGC, the Office of General Counsel. All these parties work together to identify or discover, clarify, and evaluate a resolution of the project issues. Just like the DPM with an EOR E&O, the CPM now informs the CEI to track their time separately in case the issue is determined to be the result of an error or omission. The CPM oversees the contract modifications with the contractor. You'll remember that in the EOR E&O, it's the CEI on behalf of the department works with the contractor to develop the contract modifications. After this, the CPM enters the premium cost, initial assessment of responsibility, and reason code into CITS, the CCTS. The CPM will manage the CEI E&O issue throughout resolution through all the remaining phases while working with the DCE along the way. The CPM will also manage the issue tracking in Project Suite. So that covers the CEI E&O issues. Now, appropriate documentation and tracking applies to both types of issues, whether it's a design EOR or construction CEI. Issue tracking is done by the appropriate PM. It's the design PM for EOR issues and the construction PM for the CEI issues. The district E&O liaison may be involved in the issue tracking and recovery efforts depending on district practices. The system used to track E&O issues, as we mentioned before, is the Project Suite Enterprise System or Project Suite Enterprise Edition, PSEE. And within that system, there's an RTM, the Resolution Tracking Module. So PSEE looks at the CITS system data every night at midnight and brings over into the RTM anything with an avoidability code of 1 or 3. So 1 is for EOR, 3 is CEI. The recovery of the cost claim dollar amount is tracked through the department's receipt processing system, or RPS. As far as reporting goes, our office, that's mine and Rob Quigley, my supervisor, our office is a production support office, which is one of the 3 divisions of the Office of Design. Our office produces monthly reports for the district E&O liaisons to monitor their issues. We also produce annual reports for management to report on performance of the districts in resolving E&O issues. Note that the primary performance metric in place is that 75% of all issues be resolved in the RTM within 1 year of the past date. And the past date is the date that the contract is passed from construction to the comptroller. So you have the discovery date, which is the basis of and marks the start of the stopwatch for statute of limitations. That's the discovery date. The past date is the date that is the starting point or the benchmark for the performance metrics by which the districts are measured. Beyond that, outstanding issues must be resolved ASAP. So outside of that 75% of all issues being resolved within 1 year, the remaining 25% must be resolved ASAP because they still have to keep an eye on the statute of limitations time limit. Just a note on the process flow charts. This yellow column highlights the milestone documentation and activities that must be tracked in the RTM. These boxes generally line up with the activities or phases they are associated with in the flowchart, as shown here. So you can see that the yellow boxes generally align in the flowchart with the process, and that process in the flowchart aligns with the procedure, with the order that the procedure is executed. Okay, so here are a few best practices to keep in mind when dealing with E&O issues or potential E&O issues.
Hey, Brad,
Yes, ma'am.
do you have an example of a CEI E&O?
Let's see, try to see if there's one on top of my head. An example of a CEI issue might be when it is found that a CEI did not, well, a CEI can become, what's the word, culpable with a design E&O issue when the CEI is not informing the construction project manager in a timely fashion that a design error has been found. Now, I know that there are times when there's an error or omission that is solely resting upon the CEI. I can't think of any off the top of my head though, because there are so few of them. Like I said, I think only 9 in the past 5 years. So I'm sorry I can't give you a precise example, but maybe if you can send me an email, I can confer with Rob, and maybe between the two of us, we can look into the system and try to find an example to share, if that would be helpful.
All right, well, thanks. So there aren't that many. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't stepping on any paths that would go down that direction because I couldn't think of any. But thank you.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, like I said, if you want us to dig into it a little further, please call me or send me an email. Okay, at this point, I want to remind you that timeliness matters. Prompt notification and clear communication is important between all the parties. It's also important that your documentation is clear and detailed and timely. The RTM may be used as early as the RFI stage to document the discovery of the issue. RTM must be used actively in the tracking of the issue through all phases, and documentation should be entered into RTM throughout the life of the issue. In assessing the E&O issue, the PM should look at all information available and get input from the legal office early. Remember, there are no thresholds for when to or not to pursue recovery. Recovery of cost claims for all issues must be pursued, and pursued vigorously through resolution, according to the statutes. And finally, stay on top of your issues. Make sure you actively track your issues and review them regularly to make sure the RTM is current, and to make sure you're not getting too close to a performance metric or a statute of limitation date. And this is my contact information, Brad Bradley, and my supervisor, Rob Quigley. There's our email addresses and phone numbers, and we would be happy to, or I would be happy to entertain any more questions that you have at this point. And of course, you can reach out to us by email or phone at any point during a contract execution, and we'd be happy to help you along through this procedure. So are there any questions?
Hey, you probably already answered this, but on the discovery and assessment and the CEI procedures, is that only if it's a consultant CEI? What if it's a in-house designer? Is the process somewhat the same?
It's exactly the same. Yes, sir. Even if it's a department designer or a department CEI, the procedure would be followed just the same.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. And I wanted to mention at this point to keep in mind that because the procedure was written in order to comply with federal regulations, the FHWA Florida division holds us to following our own procedure because they are involved in approving the procedure when it's written. And so they perform essentially quality assurance reviews or phase reviews on the department's ability to follow our own procedures. So they check on us at the central office level all the way through the districts. So just keep that in mind. Again, as I said before with the ADA, this is not just a requirement that the FDOT is imposing. It's a response to federal regulations, and they do check us on it to make sure that we're complying. Any other questions? All right, well, thanks, Susan.